Well, I'm pleased to have my friend and fellow New Testament nerd, Reverend Dr. Dan Morrison, chaplain, New Testament scholar, join me on NTT to talk about justice, victimhood, the book of Revelation, and all sorts of nerdy theological things that only Dan and I find interesting, but hopefully y'all do too. Dan, welcome as always to this weird little corner of God's internet.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Pretty excited about being here today and our discussion because, there are lots of things that I think relate directly to where we are within history and society.
So give us, for those who don't know you and don't have the privilege of knowing you like I do, give me the whirlwind, where you come from, how you became a Christian, how you ended up being a chaplain, New Testament nerd, and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay. Where do I come from? I hail from Alabama, Roll Tide. Sorry for anybody who's from that other school across the state or is a fan of them. I mean, yeah, I feel for you, but it is what it is. Um, attended the University of Alabama, went to the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary in Springfield, Missouri, and did my PhD at McMaster Divinity College in Hamilton, Ontario. Shout out to Cynthia Long Westfall because she got me through my doctoral program, even when there were moments of, I don't know why I signed up to do this. Oh yeah, that's right, because God called me. So, I mean, that puts it into some perspective, but I have a great passion for the church and for the academy and just practical ministry of bringing that marriage of academics to practical application for ministry. I ended up becoming a Navy chaplain by way of a weird situation. Was sitting out in California, listening to a brief about a ship I was going to visit as a civilian. And the next thought that ran through my head was, who is ministering to all those people? The next words that went through my head were, no, Lord. And I quickly said to myself, wait, you can't say no, Lord. That's an oxymoron, you moron. So you can't say no and Lord in the same sentence. It just doesn't work. And so I then gave the traditional good evangelical answer. In my head, I'm like, well, okay, I'll pray about it. Knowing the whole time, well, the one that you're praying to is the one who's like guiding you in this right now and put this in your heart and mind. So
Lord's like, I'm listening.
yeah, I'm here. Let's do this. And now I'm in the Navy chaplain corps.
Right on. Well, whirlwind tour, thank you for that. And so when I reached out to you, I had no idea what you wanted to talk about. And so it's one of those Dan and I could talk about pretty much anything New Testament nerdiness.
Pretty much.
But I was like, but what's on your heart? And so you've done a lot of work in Revelation. You, if I recall correctly, did your doctorate kind of in the world of the text, linguistics, and all that fun stuff, with Revelation. So why justice, victimhood, Revelation? Just why this realm of theology and New Testament studies?
I think that for far too long, we have made an attempt, especially within North American evangelicalism. And just let me make a quick point that when I say North American evangelicalism, that is not the total sum of evangelicalism. So let me just put that on the table right now. When I say evangelicalism, I am referring to global evangelicalism and not this strange, perverted, another word just went through my head, I think you probably know what it was, form of evangelicalism that is unique to this particular country. And I think that it is a misnomer to identify evangelicalism simply with what we're seeing in U.S. churches, and I would even dare say most North American churches today. Okay. So what has happened is within North American evangelicalism, ideas of justice have been abandoned. The whole notion of righteousness has been left behind, and there are plenty of other things that need to be left behind. But when you stop and think about it, I remember sitting in a room, and I'm just going to be upfront and blunt about what I said to myself. There was a discussion about Jesus's statement when he's, in the synagogue in Luke chapter 4, where the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. And all of a sudden, what I saw was somebody the spiritually poor. He has sent me to preach liberty to the spiritually captive. And I'm sitting here like, And I literally said, some white person wrote this Bible study.
Someone who's never been poor has written this Bible study.
Yes. And lo and behold, I was right. Because it was like this thing of everything had been, I'm like, wait, Jesus didn't say this. At least that's not how Luke portrays Jesus. And so if this is not what Jesus is saying in the text, why are we now converting what Jesus said away from a physical issue and we're making it only a spiritual issue? And that has taken place for so many centuries in this country. I mean, it was used to justify slavery. Well, yeah, you're in bondage in this age, but you know what? You'll have salvation and freedom in the age to come. So just suffer on through, fellow Christian. And Jesus will say, like, your black body might be condemned, but your white soul will be okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, and these are the things that come up. And so I think that if we simply continue to ignore that which is blatantly within the text, we are missing the opportunity to preach the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ and his kingdom.
Because I see this thing, and I won't name names, although I could. Maybe for clicks I should, but no, I'll be good. I won't pick fights. But I see a lot of this sort of, you just need to preach the gospel as this kind of response to this sort of, justice. And it's like, well, what is the gospel? And as you said, the Spirit of the Lord. So already we got a Trinitarian outworking here. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to do what? I have a holy task, a prophetic task. And I was wondering, I want to toss this to you real quick, and then we can keep going. But one of the thoughts I hear is spiritual as an adjective, at least in North America, has a connotation of existentialism. It basically means existential, spiritually dead. Well, you're existentially dead, but it's like, but maybe we've just kind of commercialized and maybe sanitized this holy word. Spiritual is a good word, in a way of kind of making it easier for people who don't have to actually think about their bodies. There's things that are taken care of. I mean, I'm not poor right now, but I'm certainly have less than I did, 6 months ago when I had a job. And you start to notice things spiritually about yourself, physiologically, how you pray. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if just kind of we've sanitized these words because we don't have need. So we need to tackle this other alleged need of existentialism or what have you. So everything kind of it's almost Gnostic, maybe is a good way of where I'm going with that. It's almost kind of Gnostic. So yeah, what do you think? Yeah.
No, I think so. So here's what we do a lot of times. Things that are spiritual are less real. And I think, and that's what people play with. So for example, this, I'm an Anglican priest. We have our whole framework of understanding the Eucharist, and we understand the Eucharist as sacrament. But then people say, well, do you really believe that this is the body of Christ? Do you really believe that this is the blood of Christ? And I tell people, yes, I do. I said, but I also believe that this is bread and wine. And they're like, well, how do you navigate that? And what do you mean? And I said, here's the thing. And I take this from Hans Boersma's book on heavenly participation. That which is spiritual is not less real, but what people do is they assume spiritual, not real. And so even in the post-communion prayer of the renewed ancient text of the Anglican prayer book, it says, we thank you for feeding us with the spiritual food of the most precious body and blood of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. So if you recognize that what is actually taking place is the understanding, yes, this is a spiritual reality that God is manifesting to us through these physical means. That by definition is the classic understanding of what a sacrament is. The problem is that within our current framework of history and society, even in the church, we have taken away the understanding of the reality of the spiritual, and we have transformed the spiritual into that which is less real, less tangible. We can't actually, it's a spiritual, it's like people talk about the resurrection of Jesus. Well, I thought he meant he was just going to rise spiritually, but like to physically rise from the dead. And what it does is the whole spiritual aspect versus physical relieves people of the practical responsibilities associated with their calling in Christ.
So it's like easier to live in this abstract world, kind of, compartmentalizing or sectioning things off. Well, my spiritual stuff goes over here. My real life goes over here. My Sunday life is here. My Monday through Saturday is here, and never the two shall meet. And so what you're saying basically is there's a holistic reality that we're like new creation, maybe is a good word for it. We're invited to literally live in this new creation that applies physiologically, biologically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, theologically, all this sort of stuff. And maybe American evangelicalism has kind of been like, well, I got my Sunday goods here. I got my weekly stuff here. And if they meet, that's wonderful. But there's no kind of, it's the life of the Spirit that feels anemic, maybe is a way of what I'm noticing.
Right. I think that the transactional nature by which most North Americans live out their Christianity, I mean, it's an atrocity, really, because it does no justice to the gospel. And people say, we just preach the gospel. What does it mean to preach the gospel? Like you raised that point earlier. And so what I ask people all the time is, okay, then what are the implications of the gospel? And once you start moving into implications of the gospel, people say, wait, what do you mean? Well, I confessed and I believed. Okay, so now how do you live? What does it mean to care for the orphan and the widow? What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? What does it mean to bless and not curse those who curse you?
Do you think it's, well, maybe it's just the United States has been in a place of, quote, blessing. And I don't mean that positively. I mean, lots of money, and when you look at the first century to say, blessed are the poor, that has a completely different connotation because everyone's poor except for, I don't know how much we take the economic scale of, say, Justin Maggott or whatever, but certainly most people are at subsistence or below, majority below. And so when you say blessed are the poor, that audience is sitting there going like, there's a word for me? Wait, hold on. There's something here for me. And a gospel that fed. And
think about this for a moment. Blessed are the poor. And then you come to a church in Revelation like Laodicea that says of itself, according to the words that are presented in Revelation 3, you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I have no need. It's a major contrast to Acts, where Peter and John are on their way into the temple at the hour of prayer. And they say, silver and gold I do not have, but what I have I give to you in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Rise up and walk. And somehow, this is my old school Pentecostal coming out, it's still in there, deep down somewhere. But it's almost as if the Church of Jesus Christ, at least within our context, has traded the power of God for economic prosperity. And counts the economic prosperity as the blessing of God, when in actuality, it seems that most of the economic prosperity hasn't come by way of blessing, but actually by way of manipulating or not abiding by the laws of God.
It's almost as if the roles have reversed in Revelation. Which one's Babylon? Which one's the actual church?
Well, when it comes to that particular congregation, nobody can tell the difference. I'm sorry, but when Jesus is outside saying, hey, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Like, wait, how are you a church and you don't have Jesus?
Why is Jesus outside your church?
He was outside like, hey, guys, let me in. Please, like, hello. Anybody want to let me in? Like, I'll come in and eat with you and you with me. Like, we'll be good. But I think that's the key framework. When you stop and consider this, how much of our socio-political propaganda has the church adopted and perpetuated? That's Thyatira all by itself.
And what a blessing to have this literature. It's like do you think it's almost as if it's inspired, the fact that God would include such literature as something for the church, a mirror to the church.
Maybe John was legitimately woke, but before woke was a bad thing. I don't know.
Well, maybe John could see. Look at this privilege. You live in houses, you have food, and yet Jesus is outside your door knocking, and you would prefer to play nasty with a certain female personification of Babylon, rather than have Jesus come in and fellowship with you, to actually have communion and fellowship.
Right.
So talk to me about justice, brother.
So easy. I was roaming through Revelation on a consistent basis, like I usually do. And all of a sudden, I remember something that Cindy told me in a conversation. She said, Dan, let your Blackness come out in your academics. Let your Blackness, let your experience speak to your scholarship. Because, I mean, she knew me well enough to know, okay, as I like to say, I learned how to read the Bible like an old white man because I was taught by a bunch of old white men for the most part. Like, that was the framework of my seminary experience. And nothing against them. I love them. They've encouraged me great deal. But she began to tell me this, and all of a sudden, I remember a conversation I had very recently where I made it a point to highlight something that an individual said in a sermon regarding slavery and how, well, slavery, well, the Bible doesn't condemn slavery. And I said, you know what? I will absolutely agree with you. The Bible does not condemn slavery, but the Bible does condemn slave trade. And they say, well, how can you have one without the other? What do you mean? I said, that's a great question. How can you have one without the other? Because when you read in Revelation, and it's this nice little spot when John is prophesying about the fall of Babylon, and all of a sudden, it's this crazy thing. Revelation 18, I'm going to pick up in verse 11. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo, wait, check this out. Cargo of silver, gold, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, and sheep, horses and chariots, and slaves. That is human souls.
It's suke, right? If I recall correctly, it's not. Yeah.
And so what you begin to recognize is that, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that the Bible in and of itself actually condemns the commoditization of human beings who are made in the image of God? And this person looks at me and says, I've never seen that before in my life. And I said, why would you?
You're not looking for it. You're not going to see it. And it's not your experience. You're not going to see it. And
right. And that's part of and what people need to recognize when they say, oh, well, preach the gospel. Okay, I am preaching the gospel. The issue is there are aspects of the gospel that you miss because your background and your history and your experiences don't allow you to see these things, and you are blind to them until somebody points them out. I mean, think about this. Within all of the frameworks of what we have right now with people crying out about legal injustice in the United States. Wait, John actually picks up on this and talks about legal injustice in Revelation. And people are like, well, no, he doesn't. Or, well, people just need to stop painting themselves as the victim. Well, let's just stop for a moment and consider this. John identifies himself as a brother and partner in the tribulation, the kingdom, and the patient endurance that are in Christ Jesus. So now, if he is a brother and partner in the tribulation, and wait, let's not forget, he finds himself on the Isle of Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Now, A plain cursory reading of Revelation reveals one thing. Anything that happens to you on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus is never good.
Mm-mm.
I'm on Patmos. Wait, the souls that were slain, that were under the altar on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Oh, wait, the dragon goes after those who hold to the commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus. I'm like, when it comes down to testimony or like the word of God, anything that happens is never just plain Jane, we're good to go.
Well, it's not like Patmos. Patmos has a nice beach, but we all know he ain't living high on the hog on the sea cliff being like, oh boy, that persecution was so worth it. It's
right. And so if people really thought about, especially people in the church, thought about the insensitive, uncaring things, they say, well, people just need to stop painting themselves as victims. Okay, well, do you say that about John of Patmos in the book of Revelation, who definitely paints himself and many of his comrades as victims of the empire? The legal injustice that those in Smyrna, end up experiencing, where he says, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison. Oh, wait, those in Smyrna, those in Pergamum are actually experiencing this, where it's like, wait, Antipas has already died among them. And then there are many others who, if they remain faithful to Jesus, will have to experience the sword of the proconsul.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, let's stop and think about this for a moment. Just because something is legal does not make it morally right. So let's take that and stick it into the pipe of just submit to the governing authorities.
Mm-hmm.
Dear Christians, fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, if you really believed in simply submitting to the governing authorities, then North American evangelicals wouldn't be in the midst of culture wars trying to fight the government or resisting anything that the government is doing.
Do you think it's because we have I was going to say a political theology, and then I realized we probably don't.
We don't have a political theology, but there's a political ideology that has been adopted by individuals in the church. And that ideology has provided some support for people. And it has also provided some alleviation from the responsibilities of the negative aspects of our culture.
Do you think there's a sense in which, because I was talking with a buddy of mine, he was going on about Romans 13, and I'm not saying Romans 13 doesn't exist, but I said, whose side do you want to be on when 1 Corinthians 15 runs around and these sovereignties and these powers and these rulers are thrown in the wood chipper by Jesus Christ? Whose side? Do you really want to be on the side of the ruling powers, the Babylon in Revelation, the principalities, the sovereignties in Paul? Do you really want to be on that side when Jesus comes in glory?
What was the answer? I'm curious.
Basically, well, we have to harmonize the two. And I said, sure. When you need to survive, Romans 13 looks like a good way to survive. But we all know Paul's thought is when Jesus comes in glory at the parousia, those powers ain't going to be around much longer.
So let's hit on Romans 13. We'll leave Revelation for a minute. I will tread where most will not dare to trod right now, because Revelation's my bailiwick. Romans is its own beast.
Yeah.
No pun intended. But when we talk about Romans 13, we cannot talk about Romans 13 as if it is this unique piece that is extracted and unique from the rest of Romans. What about reading Romans 13 in light of Romans 12? I mean, Jesus guides us in how we live in our ethics. Mm-hmm. Paul comes along the way and tells people, oh, wait, beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Now, let's just look at this. If that is the case, if we're leaving things to the wrath of God, and the governing authorities are supposed to be the tools of the execution of God's wrath, who is the avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, the governments also have a responsibility to their people, and people leave that part out of Romans chapter 13.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the key thing. It's like, wait a minute. If the government is not abiding by its responsibility, am I saying that gives citizens the right or the authority to rebel? No, I'm not. But here's the thing. Here's the problem with North American evangelicalism again. You cannot expect for those outside the church to abide by the teachings of Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
So then why do we expect for people outside the church to abide by the teachings of Scripture? Because, it benefits me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so where it benefits me, I will then manipulate the word of God to my advantage. And I will leave you as a fellow image bearer out in the cold because I have no real concern for you.
Well, we'll always have the poor, Dan. The poor you'll always have among you.
And do you know why you will always have the poor? To give you the opportunity to minister to those poor and to actually fulfill the teachings of Jesus of caring for those who have less than you do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we'll always have the poor, and we will always have the poor, and therefore we always have the responsibility of caring for the poor. Mm-hmm. Next.
Well, it's like I always chuckle because even going to Romans 1, designated Son of God in power, enthronement language, Davidic messiahship, all this stuff.
Absolutely.
All over Caesar, above Caesar, no exaltation of Caesar here. And I don't know how far I go with empire criticism because I think it kind of runs into the dispensationalism where you start finding empire criticism under every rock. And it's like, well, I don't think it's that intense. But Romans 1, if you're talking political theology, you already have a new king in town. And then anything you want to say about Caesar, I mean, the fact that he subordinates Caesar or the state or whatever we want to call it to Christ in Romans 1, whose side are we on? Are we under the good king? Are we under the sovereignty of King Jesus? To be under the sovereignty of King Jesus means you abide by King Jesus's rules in King Jesus's kingdom, care for the poor, ministering on behalf of people, submission to one another. Then we look at Romans 13. I'm just like, ooh, boy, that's not gospel. That's survival in a time of terror, basically.
I would even give you some pushback on that.
Hit me.
I think that the idea of Romans 13 provides readers with an understanding of the supremacy of the rule of Christ compared to even that which is considered to be the most powerful empire in the world. So yes, this is a powerful empire. You're supposed to submit to the governing authorities. But and I think here's the key thing. I'm gonna go here.
Go.
It's sort of like when people read passages like in Ephesians of wives submitting to their husbands. And then they almost try to make it into this whole issue of, no, a wife is to submit to every man. I'm sure you've heard these preposterous things. Mm-hmm. And so when it talks about submitting to the governing authorities, what is he talking about? He's talking about submission to the governing authorities in light of what he's talking about in Romans chapter 12. No, do not turn around. Like, you have no right to attempt to avenge yourself, but allow God to use the governing authorities. Like, think about it. The governing authority in and of itself is, like, the authorities are ministers of God. Mm-hmm. Oh, wait. The servant of God, the avenger, is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. In other words, what you're really seeing is Paul saying this great, powerful empire is subject to the God you serve.
All I think of when I hear that, and I agree, I love the pushback because now I'm thinking of I should be thinking about the Old Testament when he becks and whistles and the empires come running to do his will, unbeknownst to them. And then
Right.
God turns around and judges them for their sin of being complicit in the sin that he called them to do. It's kind of a nice little sting operation. So do you think there's maybe a little bit of, Paul maybe has that sort of world, even if he doesn't have a text in mind there?
Oh, I think he might even have a text.
Oh, okay.
Consider the previous sections of Romans. When you look at even the nature of what happens with Pharaoh, because Paul brings up Pharaoh, right? In Romans. Egypt was the world power of its day. And even with that, God utilized what was going on in Egypt for his own glory. Maybe God is using what's happening in the Roman Empire for his glory. And that's not to say that God is making these things take place and that God is, forcing Rome into this sinful state, but more so, these individuals are exercising their free will to do what they are choosing to do. And as a result, God is now utilizing that for his glory. I mean, because you have a world power, a government that God's like, okay, hey, let's look at this. I brought the smackdown on Egypt. I'll bring the smackdown on Rome too. Just because you think you're big and bad does not mean anything to me, because there is no authority except from God.
Yep.
And that's where I think we have to look at Romans 13. It's like, there are all these things, but if the government is a terror to good conduct, God will judge that. And guess what? In Revelation, we see Babylon as a terror to good conduct. There are moments in times where I would say, even in contemporary society, we see governments as a terror to good conduct. Now, and let me just go ahead and say this now. That does not mean that everything the government does is bad, which is where people automatically jump to. You're saying the government's evil and horrible. Never said that. But I will also acknowledge that governments are not necessarily perfect in their practice. And therefore, there must be accountability where there is failure.
Do you think that results in, then we leave room for the wrath of God, Romans 12, and throughout Paul as well, and that sense in which I forget exactly where in Exodus it is, but I'm almost haunted by the idea of, I've heard the cries of my people. I've heard the cries of my children.
That's chapter 4, I think.
Yeah. I can't remember, it was like between 3 and 6. But just God saying, I've heard and I remember. The fact that God is sitting there, like, it's not as if God's got a master checklist of, every bad thing you ever did, like he's Santa Claus. But the fact that God's character is such that God remembers the injustice, and God looks at governments and persons and bodies and corporate groups and nations and goes, I remember what you did to my children. And that, and the beautiful thing is, and well, it's not beautiful to Christians, but I tell them it is because I think it's true. God remembers what we do too. Yes. God looks at the church and goes, I saw what you did.
Let me tell you something. When it comes down to reading Revelation, do you know, I've come to a conclusion. It's a dangerous conclusion, but it's a conclusion nonetheless. Your being in the church, you're making a profession of faith, does not save you from the wrath of God when you abuse God's grace and engage in the very practices that the earth dwellers who take the mark of the beast engage in. In other words, just because you say, I'm in the church and I have God's grace, that does not give you the right or the privilege to just run about doing all the sin that you want to commit and then say, well, I can abuse people. And well, there's grace. There are people in the church today who take that approach. Well, there's grace. And I'm like, no. The grace of God is also there to keep you from falling. So maybe you need to apply that grace in that way instead of saying, well, there's grace because I have fallen and I'm willfully engaging in sin, which now you have diminished the potency of the grace of God, at least in your own life. And second of all, you have said that the sacrifice of Jesus Christ really wasn't worth that much. Peter explains what for he calls people to live, be holy for I'm holy, the Lord says. He explains, you know what? You were not bought with silver or gold, precious jewels, but with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. And so when you actually go out and you willfully do that, that is against the teachings of Christ and against the gospel of his kingdom, and you say there's grace, you're actually by your actions proclaiming that the shed blood of Jesus is worthless compared to so many other things in this world.
Woe to us who take Jesus for granted. So then, what is, in light of all these big questions, right? Revelation, injustice, victimization, all these things. What is the justice of God? Because the justice of God is not just a thing we affirm. It is the very thing that is the lifeblood of what God does in God's good world. What do you think? What is the justice of God? Or we could even extrapolate the righteousness, although you could call it to anything. You could, you could go with that.
We could go with that. I think here's the thing. The justice of God is the actions of his people to speak to and address the injustices within the world around us. I'm just gonna be to use the language of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
I've heard of him.
It's not the Klansman that you have to worry about. It's the moderate white person that you have to worry about. It's the moderate fill in the blank for whoever you really want to. But, you know, that's the framework that stands out in my mind most potently, because people always want to quote King in his I Have a Dream speech, but nobody wants to quote a letter from Birmingham jail. I tell people, oh, you want to listen to, you want to read the work of King? Then read his letter from a Birmingham jail, where he challenges the white moderate who simply says, well, just give it time. You're wanting change too fast. And in some ways, you want righteousness and holiness too fast within our society. You want equity and fair treatment too quickly within our framework. You need to give people, and this is what I tell people. And when you stop and consider this, sexism, racism, nationalism, and a bunch of other isms that we have within our society and within the church are the only sins for which we praise progress but fail to demand disposal. Think about this for a moment. We're so much farther along than what we were 50 years ago. Now, let's take that and do this with it. If someone were to say to you, well, I only killed 5 people this week instead of 7 like I did last week, you would lose your ever-loving God-given mind.
There are words that I'd be using that I shouldn't be using.
But you know what? That's progress. Only killing 5 people this week instead of 7 like I did last week, that's progress. And so if it's progress, you should praise me for my progress, right? That's what we do with things like racism and sexism and all these, like the things that have social implications associated with them in the gospel. We are willing to permit the sin, generally because those who don't oppose the sin in some way benefit from the sin.
Do you think maybe also there is this sense of, And I see this all. I see these extremes, but I'm not to say that I'm in the center of all this. But on the one side, sin is purely systemic. Sin is purely individualistic. And I'm like, well, why not both? Why can't sin be a structure, a power, a thing that lives on, but also something we individualistically participate in? And it's also, I mean, do we believe in total depravity or not? Does total depravity apply to systems and governments and realities and worldviews, or does it just apply to me as an individual person? And the answer is, what is sin? And maybe it's because it's easier to export sin individualistically than look at no, sin has its fingernails in everything.
Here's the thing. If you do not believe that sin can be systemic or corporate, then why do you believe that salvation can be? I mean, the one died for many. Mm-hmm. Now let's look at this in terms of sin. Through one man's sin, all sinned. Mm-hmm. But Dan, that's just cosmic and it's spiritual. You see, Rebecca.
Yep.
But then you hear the cry of Revelation 18:4 of come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. And here's the real issue. If you take part in the systemic sins of your government or your culture or your country, or fill in the blank of whatever group you want to be a part of, and you don't separate yourself from that, you will also take part in her plagues, in God's judgment against her. Because here's the funny thing. When you stop and look at it, with the exception of Smyrna and Philadelphia, every single church in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation are confronted with the sin that God is challenging among them. And he calls on them to repent. That's just not I'm sorry, Lord. Please forgive me, Jesus. I know I did it, and I'm gonna do it again tomorrow because I don't care. Forgive me because you have grace, God, right? And your mercies are new every morning. So I can commit this sin again and again. And it's okay because your grace is abundant in my life. And I'm like, that's not what he said. He said, you know what? If you do not repent, I will remove your lampstand. Now, here's the funny thing. People always talk about that. And they're like, well, see, the church doesn't exist in Ephesus and all that good fun stuff. Nuh-uh. It's real easy. When John's first vision in Revelation is inaugurated, and he turns to see the voice. Never heard of anybody seeing a voice. I'm still stuck on that, but hey, whatever.
Yeah. Woo. Yeah. Yeah. Now he's talking about, oh, yeah, that's right. He did say that. Oh, no.
I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And he said he saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands was one like a son of man. Here's the issue. If Christ removes your lampstand, you are no longer in his presence. He threatened an entire church. I will remove your lampstand. In other words, and since I'm in the midst of the lampstands, if I'm removing your lampstand, you don't get my presence. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he didn't say, well, if you say I'm sorry. He didn't say, oh, well, you can continue to abuse those who you oppose and punch people in the face, proverbially, in the name of the Lord, because, you're standing for righteousness and you're defending me, right? No, he says you need to repent. Go back to what you did at first. Redo some of these works. Like when you actually love people, that's where you need to be right now. He tells those in Thyatira, he's like, you know what? You have permitted that woman Jezebel. In other words, they had the power to stop the infiltration of the government's propaganda. They had the power to stop the marriage of their religion and their politics, and they failed to exercise their power to do so. And the Lord says, oh, you know what? Okay. I'll kill her children dead. I'm going to put her into a sick bed. And all of you who commit adultery with her, yeah, you're going to have great tribulation. Mm-hmm. Wait, these are people in the church. And here's the thing. People get stuck on this and they're like, but we're not appointed unto God's wrath. Thank you, Paul. Yes, we are not appointed to God's wrath. Mm-hmm. But the thing is this, though. You're not appointed to God's wrath, but you will suffer wrath if you participate in the sins of your empire. Mm-hmm. Fill in whatever empire group you want to mention. If you are a participant, if you are complicit, well, you mean like all the people in Sardis were? Think about it. In Sardis, getting to chapter 3 of Revelation, what do you find? What do? They don't do diddly squat. They literally do nothing. And because they do nothing, God's like, your works are not complete. You mean they don't speak against injustice? No. They exhibit apathy like nobody's business. It's like a sloth couldn't have been any more slothful. Because this church, you know what? You have a reputation that you're alive. Just preach the gospel. You have a reputation for being alive, but you are dead. Because what good does it do you to preach the gospel if you don't declare the gospel by word and deed?
But that's works-based salvation, Dan.
Ooh, you want to talk about works-based salvation?
I just throw that out.
No. I know, but you know what?
But yeah.
Because here's the thing. No, I'm not saved by works. I don't even maintain my salvation by works. But I tell you one thing, though. Works are a byproduct of your salvation.
A good tree will bear fruit.
And the thing is this, it's natural. It's a byproduct. It's the fruit of what you're doing. And you want to talk about works-based salvation. People who want to deny the significance of works, read the message to the church in Thyatira. I mean, it is amazing because the word works, I mean, just like shows up about 5 times, 5 times in this one little short passage, the word work shows up. Oh, wait, now let's not forget this. Blessed are the dead who died in the Lord, for their works follow them. Oh, wait, but nobody's saying your salvation is based on these works. But this is where people have a problem with the New Perspective on Paul, or one of the versions of the New Perspective on Paul, I should say. Because it's like, wait, but no, I do what I do because of the fact that Christ has redeemed me. Therefore, I exhibit and I am obedient to God because of my appreciation for what he has done for me. That doesn't sound like works-based salvation to me. It sounds like I was already saved. Mm-hmm. It's like I always ask people, which came first? The redemption of the people of Israel from the bondage of Egypt, or the giving of the law? I actually asked that question in a class one time when I was teaching. And people were so flabbergasted. I had people who said the giving of the law came first. And I said, where were they when the law was given? At Mount Sinai. Mm-hmm. So how'd they get to Mount Sinai? Well, they left Egypt.
God shattered the sea before they got there.
But these are the things we have to consistently remember and reflect upon. And why is it there's this major push against justice? Period. Because, people want to talk about biblical justice. And I've used this phrase before because I was attempting to, soften the blow of what people are experiencing in their triggers. And I'm like, fine, get triggered if you want to. The real issue is this. All justice is social. You can't get around that. Biblical justice is social justice because justice can only take place within a social context. What do we do with that?
Write books against it?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm being a smartass. I apologize.
No, I mean, but seriously, it's like we write books against it because, we're standing for righteousness' sake when we speak against justice. Wait, let's stop and think about this for a moment. You're standing for righteousness by writing books against righteousness.
And it's one of those, and maybe this will be kind of the nexus we kind of spend, of course, depending on how the Spirit leads. But one of the things I noticed was just by mere preaching of the gospel, kind of going back to that, through mere proclamation, that addresses the problem. And I'm sitting there going like, okay, but what is the gospel? And is the gospel a thing to be participated in and proclaimed and lived? Or is this an abstract virtue signaling thing that has no power to it, aside from its ability to mentally cause you to assent to it? Why is it not something you actively participate in as a son of God, a daughter of God in the Spirit? And I've been going through Romans 8, so the Spirit's been very on me right now. But I want to throw that to you because that's kind of one of those things I'm seeing. Just preach the gospel. I'm like, preaching is not the preaching is everything you do by demonstration of the Spirit's sovereignty in your life. But I don't want to put words in your mouth, by all means.
No, I would concur with that statement. I mean, consider this for a moment. Plenty of people can get up and preach the gospel. But is it really the gospel? No. They might preach the words. I can say the words. But if I don't actually live them out, am I preaching the gospel? No, I'm not. And I think that's part of it. What people have really, when people talk about preaching the gospel, what they really mean is just simply declare the words. I mean, it's its own version of the name it, claim it, blab it, grab it, shout it, and don't doubt it framework. I'm gonna speak the words, and because I'm speaking the words, everything's going to somehow be transformed and changed. And, and that's what it means for your life to be transformed by the power of the gospel. And I'm like, lies. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I walked into a classroom of a friend of mine, and this friend and former professor of mine actually was teaching a class dealing with frameworks and discussions of racism within early Pentecostalism in the early 1900s. And people were beginning to say, well, Charles Parham was a racist. And people were actually able to articulate, like he was a racist. And there was a student who became very upset, it seemed, by this. And he talked about how he was sick and tired of hearing people talk about how Parham was a racist because people's souls were saved. And he noted, isn't that the most important thing? The salvation of a person's eternal soul? And this guy is on this rant. And so once he takes a breath, I interject. Not my class, but I'm like, I'm going here today.
Hold on.
Yes, that was it. I rolled up the sleeves, like, we're going to have this conversation right here, right now.
It's about to get biblical.
And here's what I asked. I said, do you believe in the resurrection? And the student froze. I said, maybe you didn't understand the question. Do you believe in the resurrection? He says, well, I believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I said, okay. So in accordance with, let's see, scripture, the teachings of the early church, the creeds, since Jesus died and rose again, do you believe that we who die in him will also rise since he was the first fruits of the resurrection? And he sort of paused and was like, well, yes, was sort of the answer I got. And I said, well, newsflash, I don't plan on being white at the resurrection. And he looked and was like, well, what's wrong with being white? What's wrong with my being black? I didn't say anything was wrong with you being white at the resurrection, but I'm black. So why is there something wrong with my black? I said, let me give you the theological implications of this. If you somehow assume that I will be resurrected as a white man, you are therefore saying, and you're trying to gain some theological ground to assert that there is something inherently wrong with my blackness. And now you've moved into a theological argument to support your racism.
It's almost as if, and I mean, you held yourself pretty good. I'll just say it. That sounds more like the gospel of Thomas than the gospel of Jesus Christ, where women have to become men in order to even be saved. At least this dude granted you resurrection. It looks
Right.
like in order, that's gospel of Thomas levels of sinfulness.
Right. And so it was great because I saw this Latina student over there, and she just like gave a little like, yes. And I could see this. I said, here is the thing. You cannot acknowledge the bodily resurrection. I mean, I said, hey, I'm creedal. I said, I believe in the resurrection of the body. So therefore, if I believe in the resurrection of the body, I cannot disregard how I treat your body in this age. I say, now, before you start going on about how, well, everything's going to be healed in the age to come, I said, Jesus still bears the wounds of his crucifixion.
Look at my hands, Thomas. Look at my side, Thomas. That should scare us.
I said, that's the thing. I said, so God, and I stated this in a lecture I gave a couple of years ago. I said, God forbid that I turn around and see someone in the age to come that I wounded. I said, here's the great thing. I can rejoice in the fact that the grace of God was manifested in their life to bring healing. That I'm able to be in a relationship with that person now, but I am also reminded of what I did. But I can see how God utilized it for his glory. I said, go ahead.
No, God wipes away every tear in new creation. There's still weeping in new creation. Doesn't mean, it means it's all sanctified in some sense.
Right.
But the wounds, the scars are there for us to remember. I mean, if we want to talk sacramental theology, the wounds of Christ, the wounds that we inflicted on one another, the wounds that were inflicted upon us as victims are there as an eternal reminder of God's goodness and the impact of human sin on us as persons. Sin is abolished, annihilated. There will be none of that. But the memories are there. And I think that's for our glory and for God's glory, that God worked through that. I don't know what you think. That's kind of how I've, not to get too sacramental, but that's kind of how I always saw it.
We can go into sacramental theology all day long.
I forgot I'm talking to an Anglican.
But I think that's the thing that we have failed as North American Christians as a whole to live an embodied Christianity. It goes back to that Gnosticism you mentioned earlier. It seems more so like we want this disembodied, spiritualized, not really real framework within which we can work. Because I can then excuse how I treat you. I can excuse my behavior. I can excuse what I have done that I should not have done. I can excuse the things that I did that I shouldn't. It's like, I'm reminded of, like, in confession in our daily office. There are multiple frameworks of what we do. We ask forgiveness for the things that we have done, that we have left undone. And we acknowledge that we have done things that we shouldn't have.
Yep.
Now, guess what? The summation of that is the abuse and misuse of power. God help us to rightly exercise the authority that he has given to us.
God's watching, and that should scare all of us. And I don't mean scare, but that should leave us in awe.
No, I would even say scare in some situations.
Scare. Okay, yeah. I didn't want to be too negative, but I'm something like, yeah, it's fear. Like I want to know that God is watching what I do.
It reminds me of the meme. And it reminds me of the meme where someone says, only God can judge me. And all of a sudden, like the next frame was like, and that should scare you.
That should terrify you. Remember, God remembered Egypt. God remembered what happened. And woe to those. And one of the great stories that often gets overlooked, some Egyptians followed Israel's God into the wilderness based on that.
Yes. There was a mixed multitude.
What does this mean? So the final word for us, Reverend Doctor, who has been preaching for the better part of an hour, and I needed this in my life. What is the justice of God for the church today? And I'll use the North American church. We'll keep it right there. What does the justice of God mean for our church, the body of Christ today? Because you mentioned scholarship and the church.
Right.
They're dancers.
Yes. I think that what it really boils down to is that the justice of God means that we can't be passive. When we see sin, we must confront sin. What we do is this: we say more often than not, that's none of my business, or it's not directly affecting. Well, it's not wrong, or it's wrong, but it's not happening to where it brings no harm to the church. And I'm like, but it brings harm to fellow image bearers. We need to be willing to speak to issues, no matter whether we benefit or not. If we only want to exercise justice when we seem to be benefited, that's not justice. That is unrighteousness. And I think what we often do is we want to preach the gospel for mental assent, but we don't want to proclaim the gospel in a way that embodies or leads to practical application. I can pray for the poor. That's great, because the poor will have with us always, which gives me a constant opportunity to care for the poor. When there is injustice in our legal system, we need to address it. When there's injustice in any system, we need to address it. And let me just go ahead and go on the record of saying a lot of people, but I'm not responsible for what happened way back when. I'm not responsible for, nobody said you were. But guess what? If you're here now, you have a responsibility to help right the wrongs that took place even back then. This does not give the opportunity to say you're relieved from any and all responsibility to act now. And that is where the justice of God comes in. I mean, think about this. God didn't put us in the sinful mess that we found ourselves in. But God then took responsibility upon himself to take care of the situation. And sometimes I think that's what we miss in the church when we talk about the justice of God. The justice of God is really us demonstrating and exercising what should be done, even when we didn't create the problem.